President Benson highlighted 5 specific antichrists. It's not often that a prophet specifically names individuals.
And as an antichrist?
As an antichrist. It's pretty rare, but he did name 5. Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, John Dewey, Karl Marx, John Keynes, and others.
It's a Thought Police free zone. The Liberty Lineup radio show, where independent thought just can't be bought.
I'm an American. Red, white, and blue. And I'm a citizen of this world and of heaven. Some things were meant to be together. I believe in faith and freedom. Got a country too. I believe with faith and freedom. We're gonna make it through.
Welcome back to the second hour of the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup radio program, The Naked Truth, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore
of defendingutah.org. Today we'll be talking with Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation and what's going on with BYU supporting Bernie Sanders, the socialist, the avowed socialist. Right back.
We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, 'cause everything's on the line. We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, to save our way of life. I believe this.
We'd like to thank our show sponsor, formerly EOS Mobile, now Patriot Mobile, rebranded to reflect who you, our listeners, are. Patriot Mobile, the only cell phone service that gives you the peace of mind that your monthly bills are supporting only conservative candidates and causes of your choice, including this show. Call 877-367-7524. Be among the first 10 callers during this show today, and you'll get a special offer if you mention the Liberty Lineup radio show. Call now, 877-367-7524. That's 877-367-7524. For more information, go to patriotmobile.com. Also, just a reminder that you can listen to the Liberty Lineup online by downloading the K-Talk app to your smartphone or at k-talk.com. Great reception wherever you are. Become part of our grassroots movement by signing up at libertylineup.com, where you can also make a donation to keep this radio show on the air. Help us spread liberty around the world. So again, this is Ben McClintock with Enoch Moore talking about some things that are going on that are just kind of with the presidential election. I know we are Utah-centric, defending Utah. And so, but the presidential election is something that happens a lot. And we wanted to, that's just one part of it. But we have Hannah Stoddard from the Joseph Smith Foundation. You can go to thejosephsmithfoundation.org to find out more about their organization. And well, thanks for coming on, Hannah.
Okay, I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thanks.
I don't know if you saw the report in the Daily Herald about BYU students. Out of all of the candidates, if they were to, of the presidential candidates, BYU would elect Bernie Sanders. And so it's important. That to me is just mind-boggling that would be the case at a school of Latter-day Saints that are, as a people, we think of ourselves as more conservative and more limited government. Let's see if we can. Hannah, can you test that out real quick?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, there we go. Awesome. Okay.
There you go.
So
Technical
Hannah
difficulty.
Stoddard from the Joseph Smith Foundation, josephsmithfoundation.org. Did I make sure I didn't? There's no "the" in the website, is
Nope,
there?
just
no
josephsmithfoundation.org.
Gotcha. So tell us, just real quick, introduce yourself to our audience.
Right.
You've been on the Liberty Lineup radio show before, but just kind of tell us about yourself.
Right. So I work with the Joseph Smith Foundation, and our organization is focused on, number one, teaching and trying to promote information to support the fact that there is no error in the revelations. Joseph Smith said there is no error in the revelations. And that's a really important point for a lot of people to realize, because they right now we're living at a time, and we're going to talk about this later today, especially BYU is a huge battleground there, but where people are not taking the scriptures seriously. on science, on government, on the family, on health, on a wide variety of issues. And it's important. We have to go back to our moorings, or at least acknowledge that we have moved from those moorings.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's not, I shouldn't be controversial to say that that's a pretty documentable fact.
That's what we're going to talk about today, unfortunately, and what we can do about it. And people need to kind of pull their heads out of the sand, realize what's going on, because when you become aware, then you're able to hopefully save our youth. Because that's what I think what was so shocking about this BYU poll here. Sadly, it wasn't too shocking to me. My dad did polling at BYU when he was there, so this is early 90s, and he did polls where about 80, he saw through his statistics that about 3/4 of the professors were extremely liberal during that time, and about 25% of the students were. Well, now we can see the students have come over. The students are now being
caught up with the professors,
right?
Basically.
Exactly. And so with this, now with this poll here, and I think when a lot of people, when they look at the poll, the first thing they think is saying, well, this is just socialist. It's not a big idea, right? It's just liberal. This isn't evil like communism or something like that.
Or the church is neutral on politics, so
right.
It shouldn't matter what Latter-day Saints vote for.
Right. And in response to that, I just brought this quote here from President Benson. He said, "We should be all opposed to socialistic communism, for it is our mortal and spiritual enemy." I think that's interesting. It's not just a spiritual doctrinal threat.
Right.
He says it's the greatest evil in the world today, for communism is just another form of socialism. And then, of course, you have the first presidency in 1966 saying the position of this church on the subject of communism has never changed. We consider it the greatest satanical threat to peace, prosperity, and the spread of God's work among men that exists on the face of the earth.
And I want to emphasize that quote you just gave. That was an official church publication.
Right.
They made an official pamphlet to clarify what is the church's position on communism. And they said it's not a political party. It is the greatest threat to God's work. It is a satanic threat.
And so you
Right.
can't be a good Mormon and a communist. It's against what. And this isn't just
You can
one
be a
guy's
good person, I guess, but apparently,
but not a good Latter-day Saint.
right? By definition.
By definition,
right?
And so, which means, well, if you're the biggest threat to freedom, I don't think you can be. You talk, a good person. You're a threat to everybody's liberty and to religious and physical liberty.
You're right. If you truly understand what communism is, then you're really not. You're right.
Really not.
There's a lot of
You're a
people
threat.
duped, though, is what I mean.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And so it's not just a random person, one quote. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, that was just that one guy that one time. This was an official statement signed by all three members of the first presidency.
Which makes it doctrine.
Which makes it official doctrine that the church opposes communism.
And I'm not here to tear BYU down, right? It's kind of like Joseph F. Smith said, we don't tear down the house they have, we build a better house. But we need to acknowledge that we have moved away from our moorings. BYU was founded, it was endowed by Brigham Young to fight Marxism and Darwinian evolution.
Explaining what's really going on, I don't think tears it down. I think we need to help people understand telling the truth doesn't tear down.
Right. And we want to acknowledge, we want to just say, okay, you have your opinion. Let's just clarify what the sides are. Let's clarify the truth. Let's clarify what's really going on and allow people to pick sides. Right now, I don't feel that I'm 21 years old. I don't feel like my peers are getting told both sides of the story.
Right.
They're only being told one side. I want all sides of the story told, so everyone, and if you choose to disagree with the presence of the church, or you don't agree with the scriptures, that's fine. But let's just acknowledge that there is a difference.
And know where you are. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And if you don't want to disagree with those things, we need to find out how we can become in line with those things.
And most people are not aware that Brigham Young University, the endowment that Brigham Young had to fight Darwinism and Marxism.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Let me just say, I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
I knew generally that was the purpose, but I had not seen that was that official. Was it a dedicatory prayer? He said that?
It's in a letter to Brigham Young. I have the quote here that I'd like to read.
All right.
So Brigham Young wrote to his son. This is when he's founding the Brigham Young Academy, which is the forerunner to Brigham Young University. And Brigham Young said, "We have enough and to spare at present in these mountains of schools where young infidels are made because the teachers are so tender-footed so tender-footed that they dare not mention the principles of the gospel to their pupils. But they have no hesitancy in introducing into the classroom the theories of Huxley, of Darwin, of Mill, and the false political economy which contends against cooperation in the united order. So just to clarify some names. So Huxley, he was a huge proponent of Darwinian evolution. You have Darwin, of course, and then you've got the false political ideas. So Brigham Young is standing here in a history, and he's seeing Marxism, he's seeing socialism, he's seeing Darwinian evolution, and he's saying, this needs to be stopped. The buck stops here. We are going to I have this dream. He has this vision of founding a university that can contend against this, that can stand as a light. He says, this is continuing his letter, he says, this course, the course of Mill and Darwin and Marx, I am resolutely and uncompromisingly opposed to. He says, I hope to see the day when the doctrines of the gospel will be taught in all of our schools, when the revelation of the Lord will be our text, and our books will be written and manufactured by ourselves and in our own midst. As a beginning in this direction, I have endowed the Brigham Young Academy at Provo. So what does the word endowed mean, right? He's giving the money. This is his passion. This is his dream. He's pouring everything he has into this. And so you just can ask yourself the question, I wonder how he feels now when the university he founded to refute Darwinism and Marxism is now the students are voting socialist.
That wouldn't be the first reason why he rolled over in his grave, but it's
one of them.
it's definitely one of them.
Right.
Oh, wow. So people need to understand that people think that the church is, neutral on that because now BYU is going against that very idea that the fact that the organization that the university was founded upon. Mm-hmm. And so we need to understand what were the foundations of it and what does that mean for us today?
Right. That's what we need to understand. We need to go back in our history and realize, and the controversy is not new. And again, we're not anti-BYU here. I just want to clarify that. My great-grandfather, he lived where the BYU campus is today. In fact, if our family still had the farm, we would be living right there in the middle of BYU campus. It was almost right there next to the Joseph Smith building. And BYU is part of my great-grandpa's life. They donated money. They had the perpetual basketball seats. But there's an interesting story from his journal that shows this isn't a new controversy. We might be shocked thinking, oh, this is new. It's not new. This is from my great-grandpa's journal. He said, one of the speakers at our sacrament meeting, this is before he went on a mission, so he's just a very young man. He said, one of the speakers at our sacrament meeting was one of these intellectuals from the university. So he's speaking to the professors. He gave the substance of his talk like this. He didn't like to hear our young men come home from the mission field declare that they knew that God lived, that they knew this and they knew that. And this professor said, well, why anything? We may even be dreaming that we are living. So my great-grandfather said, this sounded a little ridiculous to me, but I went to my father, I asked, how about that? And he said, my dad had a scripture to fit the occasion, as usual, and his father quoted from Nicodemus when the Savior said, we speak that we do know, we testify that we have seen. And so you can see this controversy is not new. This is the same principles my dad heard over and over and over when he was on the campus. So this is not a new idea, but it's something we need to realize.
Gotcha. Wow. So this is something that people need to understand of what BYU's foundation was and how we've strayed from that foundation and how we can go back to correct principles. It's about what's right and wrong. Mm-hmm. And go and be able to build that house, like you said, build it the right way. And you've got to know where you went wrong to be able to know how to go right. Mm-hmm. So this has been McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore,
from defendingutah.org, and this is the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. We'll be right back with Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore,
from defendingutah.org, and we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, with the Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment, where we think right and wrong, not right and left.
Unlike BYU, that seems to be thinking right and left today, in their at least their students in their polls.
That's for sure. But we're sponsored by Patriot Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. So I think if, you're already, your cell phone bill can either go to support big government and changing the culture to be against liberty, or you can help things like this radio program by just switching your cell phone. Really easy thing to do. You're going to have a cell phone anyways. But we're back with Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation. You can learn more about them at josephsmithfoundation.org. And we were talking about what's going on at BYU. You know, kind of the thing in the news was how BYU students were supporting Bernie Sanders as their presidential preference. And so how much we've changed from a people of supporting liberty to being a people that are supporting tyranny, people that are supporting something the first presidency of the church said was the antithesis of the gospel.
Right. And I think the question, at least a lot of us are asking, is, okay, how did we get to this point, right? How did this happen? I can guarantee if we did a poll of the parents of those students, they would not have overwhelmingly voted for Sanders. I'm just going to throw that out. Maybe not, but there's a pretty good chance. And so the parents are shocked. They don't understand what's going on. And really, to understand this, we have to go back in history. And before the break, I mentioned about how my great-grandfather wrote in his journal how even during his time, he saw this intellectual war of revelation is not accurate. You can't know things. You might believe things.
And that wasn't just in the world. That was a conversation within the church.
Right. Correct. And you know, that was almost word for word what my dad heard in the early 90s when he went to BYU. He wrote a letter to the president at the time, and he said, "This is what I'm hearing my professor say. What is going on with this?" The same thing. Don't make people bear testimony that they know things. You can't know things. And so even then there was this faith struggle. And it was hard for me to understand exactly how we got to this point, but it really pivots back to the very beginning of Brigham Young University, and that was in the early 1900s. And the story really starts around 1932 with in Provo, Utah, hot July day, and this old man is in his home, and he is struggling to make this decision of whether to end his life or to continue on. He struggled with depression, really severe health issues, and this war wages on until finally he kills himself with a hunting rifle. And this man was actually president of BYU, George H. Brimhall. And then fast forward about 20 years after that, President David O. McKay was dedicating a chapel, and as he stood there, this old man kind of in the distance came up, and the man just in tear-filled eyes told President McKay who he was, and President McKay just reached out his hand and said, I know who you are, I know your heart. And the man just poured out all of these regrets, grief that he had had for years. And now this man was actually a professor who was hired by President Brimhall back in the very early days of BYU. So you can ask, okay, what's going on here? What led these men? Who were these men? So the story starts, and this is a story that President Packer told in a talk called Snow White Birds. You can research it up, or several other sources. But in the early 1900s, Brigham Young Academy, we talked about that, right? President Brigham Young endows Brigham Young Academy to fight Darwinism, fight Marxism. This is this dream. It's going to go out there and be this voice for truth. So in the early 1900s, it's struggling to get started, and so they really President Brimhall wanted to turn it into a college of recognition, hire professors with degrees, move more from the farmer types of teachers to ones with experts and degrees, and from Harvard and Yale, and people started, they wanted to look good in the eyes of the world, right? They wanted to be prestigious, want to be prominent. What does the world admire?
That's usually a problem.
That tends to be a problem, doesn't it? And that's what happened here. It was they determined this, and this is a quote from some of the accounts of the time. They determined that practicality and religion, which had characterized the school, must now give way to more intellectual and scientific philosophies. So you saw this kind of shift. In fact, John Dewey was invited to come to, it was Brigham Young Academy at the time, in 1901. He traveled all the way to Utah, came, was well received on the campus. Now, if you don't know who John Dewey is, President Benson highlighted 5 specific antichrists. It's not often that a prophet specifically names individuals
And as an antichrist?
as an antichrist. It's pretty rare, but he did name 5. And it ties right into this BYU discussion because he was actually speaking to the youth and he was speaking to the parents as a warning. He said, "As a watchman on the tower, I feel to warn you that one of the chief means of misleading our youth and destroying the family unit is, not pornography, our educational institutions." He said President Joseph F. Smith referred to false educational ideas as one of the 3 threatening dangers among our church members. If parents become alert and informed, as President McKay admonished us last year, these parents can help expose some of the deceptions of men like, and then he's going to name specific individuals. See if you recognize any of these names. Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, John Dewey, Karl Marx, John Keynes, and others. Now, some of those, Darwin, we recognize. Freud, if you've studied psychology, he's the father of psychology. John Dewey, who is John Dewey? He was the father of the Humanist Manifesto. He was also really the mastermind behind our entire government education system today. And he was very anti-God. And so you can ask yourself the question, why is he coming to Brigham Young Academy that in later years becomes Brigham Young University? And really why it comes down to just being intellectually naive, not understanding what's going on. And so President Joseph F. Smith is watching this, of course, and he's not too happy about the direction that's being changed. But it really climaxed in 1907 and 1908 when President Brimhall, he hired these 3 new professors. Joseph and Henry Peterson in 1907, Ralph Chamberlain in 1908. So Joseph Peterson was a psychologist. So right there you've got one of the Antichrist, President Benson highlighted. You've got Ralph Chamberlain. He was a head of the Department of Biology at U of U. So he a full-fledged Darwinist, hardcore Darwinist. So they come on the scene and they are adamant that they are going to turn Brigham Young University into a force for Darwinism and Marxism, which is the opposite of what Brigham Young envisioned.
That list of names that he called Antichrist, basically representing the ideas that are opposite of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that covers every aspect of society.
Yes.
Keynes, our entire economic system and banking system, our entire educational system, Sigmund Freud, our entire psychological philosophy. I don't know how prevalent it is, but largely. That covers everything that we're surrounded with on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Every area of life or thought. Those are the chief kingpin leaders.
Well, that goes back to what Karl Marx said in the Communist Manifesto, was they needed to change the social order, starting off with one small step at a time, steps that were so small that they would seem insignificant to those around us, and they would say, oh, okay, we can take that.
Exactly, and that's what you saw happen when these 3 professors came onto the BYU campus. It's interesting. I have some of the specific things they started teaching. Number 1, they saw in the principles of evolution a controlling idea around which not only purely scientific concepts, but also religious and psychological systems could be constructed. In other words, Darwinism is a religion. It's a worldview. It's not just scientific. If you only think it's a scientific theory or hypothesis, you don't realize what it is. It's a worldview. But
Gotcha. And that's something people need to recognize, is that it takes Darwinism is as much of a theory and of a faith-based measure.
Right.
That it's not just hypothesis, experiment, and then result. That's not. I mean, there's no experiment involved in Darwinism.
Right. Right.
The difference between those 2 religions is this: you have one theory of in the beginning there was God, and the other theory in the beginning there was
nothing.
There was nothing. There was a dirt. So who created the dirt? Who created the empty space before that? Who created? It's eventually it goes back to a faith in a something, whether you want to call it emptiness or whether you want to call it intelligent design. It's still a faith.
It's still basically based on a hypothesis that they've got no evidence for and can't do an experiment to prove.
Right. And so you ask the question, how did this theory get so popular? Right? How did they come on the campus? Because these 3 professors were hugely popular. Later on, when President Joseph F. Smith then threatened to have them removed or have them their enrollment terminated.
That's something we want to talk about, too, is how does this stuff go on, and that this has been an issue that presidents of the church have had to deal with for a long time.
Exactly. Students were protesting in support of the professors. They were
Is that because they've kind of gained that relationship with them? They kind of have like a parent-child relationship going, and so they just, as opposed to sticking to principle, it's about personalities.
Right. And these three men, they were very charismatic. They were very popular. They walked in with their new ideas. They're educated. They have their degrees. They're the experts here. And it was interesting because one of their chief attractions was that they came on the scene and they said, you can't trust the scriptures as historically accurate.
BYU professors came into BYU saying you can't trust the scriptures. Did I just understand you correctly?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they were allowed to remain there as professors.
Right, and that's and the people were just eating it up. So, for instance, Chamberlain, he believed specifically the theory of evolution. He said this is how we understand the origin of man's theological beliefs. Now, what is he saying there? He's saying you have to take Darwinism and apply it to religion. In other words, the prophets in the old days, in the Old Testament, they're these backwoods kind of products of their time. Abraham, he's out there in the desert. They're not intellectually intelligent, right? And they're just making this up as they go. It's this evolution of religion. Old Testament, it's mostly folklore, fairy tales. New Testament, it's just kind of weird. These miracles, speaking in tongues. This is not scientific. We've really got to move on. It's nice stories you can sing about in primary. But when you come on campus and you're ready to grow up, it's time to throw off the Grimm's fairy tales and move on. And that's really where the battle line comes down to. And in fact, William Chamberlain, he got up in sacrament meeting, this is 1910, and he spoke on the book of Jonah, and he said, the Bible is just a number of superstitions. We've just got to understand it as kind of a parable. Now, interestingly, you might think this is just an issue of the past. Well, Dwayne Jeffrey, he's retired now, but he was a professor at BYU. He's still alive. He wrote an article in Sunstone magazine where he said, and he was a very popular professor, is very popular amongst BYU students. And he said the story of Noah's flood is ignored as childish nonsense in most of the academic world. It's given no more attention nor validity than Grimm's fairy tales. Can one really fit 10 million species onto a single ocean-going vessel, feed and care for them all, with all their often very restrictive diets? And then he goes on, the answer plainly is no. This is the attitude. A scripture can't be trusted. It's just a bunch of folklore we really need to move on from. And that's the undergirding of the foundation that then, once you have that in place, it's not a shock when the students are voting socialist or when they're having all these faith crises. It's obvious.
Well, especially at a school that is, people go there thinking this is the official position of the church. What I learned from my class is, whether it's true or not, is the perception, I think, that we have that what we're going to learn is basically approved curriculum that is based on the scriptures and approved by the brethren. Right,
and parents need to recognize, right, they're sending their children thinking, okay, my child, I'm teaching my child that the scriptures are accurate. I'm teaching them that the Constitution was a inspired founding, and then they're sending their children to school and they don't know what's going on in the classroom.
I think it's that the same, they're like, oh, thank goodness, my kid made it through the government school throughout his life and he still has faith. I'll send him to BYU, he's safe, he's good to go. And then all of a sudden they go there and they learn that's not the case.
Right. And so it's time for us to draw a line in the sand and recognize where do we stand on this issue, become aware of what's going on, and then decide, where do we stand? Do we stand with the philosophies of men, or where are we going to stand with the revelations?
So, Hannah, when will you be president of BYU?
Never.
Then we'll fix that. We'll fix the problem.
Well, I think the solution is right now. Every person listening, they can do something. We can talk about that after the break.
Yeah. So we've got just
1 minute.
We got 1 minute, and so as we're getting into the next thing, what's kind of led us to this point? Mm-hmm. We can see this happened that long ago. I think, as we'll talk about when we get from the break, as well as the solution is, we had this early issue going on. Why didn't the presidents of the church, because they have big influence, I'd imagine, at BYU, you'd hope, and why didn't they nip this in the bud? Why didn't they take care of this? Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is people don't realize that this has actually been an issue that's been talked about and has been something that they've been wanting to go over for a long time. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host
Enoch Moore
from defendingutah.org, and this is the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup Show, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. For more information about this, go to our Facebook page, the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. Like and share. And after the break, we'll be continuing with Hannah Stoddard from the Joseph Smith Foundation. And you can read more about, they've documented all of the stuff that we've talked about. They have great articles and a lot of different tools for you to be able to use to see what the sources of these are. Go to josephsmithfoundation.org. josephsmithfoundation.org. We'll be back right after the break. This is Ben McClintock with Enoch Moore from defendingutah.org, and we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, the Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Sponsored by Patriot Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives, and we're talking with Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation, josephsmithfoundation.org. And we're talking about, we kind of got this conversation started, why we had you on. We're talking about how can BYU students be supporting Bernie Sanders? Not somebody that, we say, oh, look at his policies, they're socialistic, and then he denies it. He's like, you say he's a socialist, he's like, yeah, duh. Yes, I'm a socialist and proud of it. And we've got BYU students, when the church has said that that officially the church is against socialism and communism, are supporting Bernie Sanders, as if it was up to BYU, Bernie Sanders would be our next president. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's crazy. And then, so what led us to that? We've been kind of going over the history, how BYU professors come in and try to undermine the faith. BYU professors saying that the scriptures aren't reliable, that we can't rely on testimony, that these things are just pure fiction. Right. And what happened in different stories of trying to kind of take grapple that.
Yeah, well, the specific story we were just talking about before the break were these 3 professors that were hired by President Brimhall. They come on the campus, and their main push was the revelations can't be trusted. The miracles in the scriptures should be considered folklore. They're fairy tales. We need to push them aside. Evolution is a fact, and we need to embrace the new post-Christian era and time to become more intellectual, more scientific. And so-called scientific. So President Brimhall, he's hearing complaints about these professors, and he was trying to work with them, a little skeptical, until some students came to him and said, we've just stopped praying. There's no reason to pray. There's no God that's listening to us. And he started realizing, wait a minute, something's going on. And then he had this dream. And the dream is very symbolic. And the reason why we're telling this story is because this story is happening every day on the Brigham Young University campus today. There's multiple instances, and we've talked about some, and we could talk about more. But so President Brimhall had this dream. He saw several of the BYU professors standing around a peculiar machine on the campus. When one of them touched a spring, a baited fish hook attached to a long, thin wire rose rapidly into the air. Casting his eyes around the sky, President Brimhall, discovered a flock of snow-white birds circling among the clouds and disporting themselves in the sky, seemingly very happy. Presently, one of them, seeing the bait on the hook, darted toward it, grabbed it, and instantly one of the professors on the ground touched a spring in the machine, and the bird was rapidly hauled down to the earth. So what is he seeing? He's seeing these professors standing there. They have this baited hook, and you have these beautiful birds flying freely, and they're attracted to the bait and instantly are hauled down to the earth. On reaching the ground, the bird proved to be a BYU student, clad in an ancient Greek costume, was directed to join a group of other students who had been brought down in a similar manner. Brother Brimhall walked over to them, and he noticed that all of them looked very sad, very discouraged and downcast. And he asked them, "Why, students, what on earth makes you so sad and downhearted?" "Alas, we can never fly again," they replied with a sigh and a sad shake of the head. Their Greek philosophy had tied them to the earth. They could believe only what they could demonstrate in the laboratory, and their prayers could go no higher than the ceiling. They could see no heaven and no hereafter. Now that dream, from what I have seen, that the symbolism behind that dream, I have seen that every time I go to church, every time I interact with my peers, it's not the students' fault. For the most part, they are going onto that campus without the armor. They're going into this fight. They don't realize that there's a war going on.
They don't think that they need armor because they're going to BYU.
Right. Well, and then they think, okay, this is just, they've never been told both sides of the story.
Right.
And so President Joseph F. Smith, he got involved, the church board got involved with these 3 BYU professors and basically gave them an ultimatum. He said, you need to stop teaching evolution and these implications, or you can no longer teach on this campus. All 3 of them decided to leave. But
what year was that?
this is 1900, so 1913 is later on when Joseph F. Smith is going to make a prophecy, but specifically when they were fired or their professorship was terminated was 1910 and 1911.
So that wasn't. Go ahead. Sorry.
BYU students, because of BYU professors, were saying, I don't need to pray anymore.
Right.
Because of the way they were teaching. You know, it's one thing to say, this is another theory about evolution. Let's just understand some of the things the world is saying, as opposed to really saying, teaching it and having students internalize it and suggesting implications, such as your prayers don't matter.
Right.
And, you know, just briefly, my wife is going to BYU right now, and she has a professor who came to her and told her, I have never seen so many depressed students at BYU. I worked here. I remember how long it was. It was decades that this professor had been working there, and she said, I've never seen so many students come to me with so many problems with depression, and in the entire time she's ever worked there. And now that's coinciding with these types of things.
We're back in the 1910s, they were getting rid of these kind of professors, where now it's a part of the official curriculum of BYU to teach Darwinism.
Right, because both sides are not being told, right? I have no problem with anyone teaching evolution. I have no problem if you want to believe. Although I have no problem with those 3 BYU professors even sharing their side and sharing it with passion. But the issue is when that is the only side presented.
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And you don't get the other flip side, because students need to be able, I think we should be able to see both sides of the issue, and then you can make a decision. And you and I might disagree, but at least we acknowledge accurate history and what the accurate arguments are and where the battle line is.
And they were able to do that back then. I remember hearing a story from Cleon Skousen where he talked about how these things were a real problem during David O. McKay and President Benson, even today's era, where they tried to get rid of them, but they weren't able to for some reason. And I'm trying to do research on why they couldn't, but it seems like something with like the Board of Regents having more control over it than even the president of the church. Mm-hmm. But we want to be able to get on the line. We want to be able to talk to people about the other shows that we have. We have on the line Jeff Chamberlain of the Hollywood Y Guy from Friday's show, every Friday, 10 to 11, right here on the Liberty lineup. Jeff, you're on the air.
Hey, thanks, guys. What a great show. I'll tell you, you're addressing an issue that I have struggled with trying to get my arms around. What on earth is going on at BYU, of all places? And this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much for this show.
Thank you, Jeff, for coming on and talking to us. We've been discussing what happened, and it seems like with your perspective with Hollywood, I know Enoch wanted to ask you a question, maybe not directly related, but I think we should bring up as well. But
Sure.
Before we get to that, was that Hollywood is kind of playing a direct role amongst even the youth here in Utah and those that would attend BYU, and getting us to kind of accept that. So it's easier to accept once we go there. What do you have to say about that?
Well, of course. I mean, the media is so pervasive. The media plays such an active role in shaping not only the political agenda, when you look at the media and news media and pundits, all that, but Hollywood is shaping culture. And the discussion down in Hollywood has always been, hey, is Hollywood reactive or is it transformational? Is it pushing its agenda? Of course, Hollywood has always, when you study Hollywood, when you look at the roots, the genesis of Hollywood, who are these people? Where did they come from? The beginning of the century and post-World War II. You come to understand the people. There's a certain homogeneity of thought, and leftism, progressivism, leftism, even Marxism has been intrinsically woven into their psychology, and political belief system for a whole bunch of reasons, which is certainly worth discussing. It could be a whole hour show. But but the point is that yes, of course, anybody that looks at the creative content and output of Hollywood has to understand there is an agenda that's being pushed and constantly being pushed. And, of course, our people of faith, and it's not just the LDS Church, it's people all over the place, and especially millennials, especially the youth, are being bombarded with this constant messaging and social re-engineering agenda. It's going on, and what we're looking right now happening at BYU seems to be the fruits of their labor.
Definitely. We're entrenched as much with the world as anybody and being able to be influenced in that way before they even go.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I've studied a lot as well about the Marxist infiltration of Hollywood, the Frankfurt School, and
exactly.
George Lukács, and people don't recognize that Marxism and evolution are a worldview that influences every area of life or thought. It's not just politics. We're talking
not
about
at all.
And it's not just science, like they want to
exactly.
claim.
No, it's secular. We have to understand that secularism is a religion. It's an anti-God, anti-faith, anti-family religion, and the missionaries of it, those high-profile missionaries, are certainly embedded right in the Hollywood culture. You need to understand, in the early days, we had people like, Sid Caesar, Milton Berle, hugely successful leftist liberals. But the writers on these shows, Sid Caesar, the biggest guy of his time almost, you know who his writers were? Jewish liberals, and there's a reason why the whole Jewish community, the liberal Jewish community, has played such an important part of early Hollywood. But he had writers like Neil Simon, Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, Carl Reiner. These guys started right there as writers, content writers for the big names like Sid Caesar.
Right, and I think, if you ask yourself the question, did the prophets talk about this? We can say yes. For instance, Moroni at the end of the Book of Mormon, right? They saw our day, and we've done some documentaries on the Book of Mormon and just how applicable it is to our day. But when Moroni said, "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers who sell yourselves for that which will canker, why have ye polluted the holy church of God?" He's not talking about evangelical churches there. He's talking to us, and he saw us. So you have to ask yourself the question, why are they putting that in the Book of Mormon?
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, Jeff, we've just got a minute left, so I wanted to thank you for coming on. You're Jeff Chamberlain, the Hollywood Y Guy, every Friday, 10 to noon, right here in the Liberty lineup. Anything you want to say before we let you go?
Well, listen, it's Oscars weekend, of course, Sunday. We're going to be talking about a lot of these issues, tying them into Hollywood, and I'm interested to see what kind of platform some of our progressives are going to use the Oscars for this weekend. But lots to talk about. I'll be on the show. Of course, I'll be doing the show tomorrow, 10 to noon. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Jeff.
Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
So, Hannah, what can we, in that last minute that we have, or less than a minute,
right,
direct everybody to go to josephsmithfoundation.org. What else do you want to say
right.
before we let you go?
Just kind of as a closing, I recognize that this is a theology that historically Darwinism, Marxism, these theories are not just ideas. They're ideas that have slaughtered millions of people. Now, most of my listeners would take issue with me saying that, but that you study history, study what the prophets have taught. And there's a reason Joseph Fielding Smith said that organic evolution was Satan's chief weapon against the gospel of Jesus Christ in this dispensation. There's a war going on. If you don't recognize it, you're probably a casualty or will be a casualty. You got to, the line is being drawn in the sand right now. It's a huge climax right now. Your children's lives are at stake. Your spiritual testimonies are at stake. We have to choose between the scriptures, believing there is no error in the revelations, or compromising with the philosophies of men. It's a battle we can win if we're willing to become informed and get engaged.
Thank you. Hannah Stoddard, Joseph Smith Foundation, josephsmithfoundation.org. Special thanks to our sponsor, Patriot Mobile, the cell phone service that supports conservative candidates and causes. Go to patriotmobile.com for more information. Mention the Liberty Lineup radio show. This has been McClintock with Enoch Moore from Defending Utah. See you next week.